Last week, I got the chance to sit down and watch Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes with the film's director, Wes Ball. Throughout the film, Wes took dozens of live questions from all of you who watched along live and gave his own additional insights into the film, as well as what's to come next with some new and exciting updates regarding its sequel. I'm here to break it all down and take a closer look at everything he had to say. If you like what I do here and want to show your support, be sure to hit the like button on this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so that you can stay up to date on all things apes. Enjoy the video. Hey everybody, and welcome back to Ape Nation, your number one source for all things Planet of the Apes on YouTube. My name is Josh, and as I said up top, last week, to celebrate almost 1 year since the release of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, I did a live watch-along with the film's director, Wes Ball. First of all, thank you to everyone who tuned in to watch live and who sent in questions. I had a really great time watching the movie with Wes and getting to learn some new details about it. I also really loved getting to interact with all of you and share such a cool experience with a bunch of fellow Apes fans. You guys sent him a bunch of really great questions, and among a lot of the things that Wes had to say, he also spent a bunch of that time talking about where the series might go next. So I thought it would be fun to pick out every piece of information that we got and give you some of my thoughts. And the first and potentially biggest thing that Wes had to say is about the next film's release date, as well as whether or not he will return to direct.
Let's say this. I know that the studio is very much wants it to be in 2027, but I also know that the studio and all the creators involved will not rush this if it's not right. They all love this franchise too much, myself included, and that, you know, there's no reason to rush a release date. It's to get the story right, to get this the kind of you know, you almost want to work on basically 2 and 3 at the same time. Essentially, you really want to just kind of map those 3 out. You know, once the first one was a success and kind of proved the rule, you know, that this could work. I think you go in knowing that you want to, you know, finish these 2 movies out together. And so there's still a lot of work to be done. But there's also the complicated issue is that right now I'm in New Zealand working on the next different movie. And so it's just going to come down to a question of scheduling and time for myself, whether everyone will wait for that or whether they need me or not. It's kind of not, it's not my franchise, right? I was just a lucky visitor in this franchise for this movie, at least. I can't confirm or deny anything really, except that we'd love for it to happen. But I think we all want to do it right.
So when it comes to the film's reported and potential 2027 release date, Wes did confirm that the studio, whether that be Disney and 20th Century Studios or just Disney or just 20th Century, they do definitively want this movie out in 2027. There is no date locked down, but that is the year they want this movie out. What he also confirmed is that the studio also does not want to move forward until they are sure where they want to go. They don't want to rush into things just to meet a release date. And right now, movies 2 and 3 are currently being worked on. The story of what this trilogy is going to be is being mapped out in total before they actually go forward with it. And it is still to be determined if Disney and 20th Century wants to wait for Wes Ball or get a new director. As for my thoughts on all of this, I do still think that 2027 is going to happen, but after hearing that both the studio and the filmmakers are all of the mind that they want to make sure they get it right and they want to take their time and they want to make sure they know what story they're telling first and take their time with it, I do now think that 2028 is definitely on the table. I don't 100% think that's what's going to happen, but I'm more convinced now than I was before that a 2028 release is actually pretty possible, if not somewhat likely, but we'll see. What I did love about what he had to say is that he made it clear that the entire trilogy is being planned and mapped out before any final decisions get made. Whether he comes back to direct or not still remains to be seen, and I'll get to that in just a second, but I just love that the team making these movies is putting the story first and putting the trilogy first and making sure it all feels like something that is going to work as a collective before just diving into the next movie and getting it out for a 2027 release. I think it's very smart, I think it's very practical, and I think it's going to pay off in the long run. As for Wes coming back to direct, this is something that I have gone back and forth on multiple times over the course of the last year or so. After Kingdom came out, I was pretty much in the 100% convinced camp that Wes Ball's not going to come back to direct, and I held on to that belief for a pretty long time until sometime towards the end of last year I started being convinced that maybe he could do both. What did start to really change my mind is when that report came out just a few weeks ago that I did a video on that said that Wes Ball was reportedly attached to direct the sequel. That made me start to think that maybe it actually could happen. Maybe he could make time to do both. I don't know how, but maybe he could. I will say that now just seeing and hearing from him personally how much this current Legend of Zelda movie is going to take up so much of his time and so much of his energy and how probably big of a film it's going to be, I really just don't think it's gonna happen. It just doesn't seem likely. I think the only real way that Wes comes back to direct this movie is if it's coming out in like 2029 or later. I just can't see a world in which he's gonna come back and do the next movie right now. Maybe I'm wrong, but it just doesn't seem like it's gonna happen. I've gone back and forth on this so many times now that to me, it's ultimately kind of just a coin flip. It could happen, it couldn't happen. I think it's probably not going to happen, but anything's possible. As for what the future films may explore in terms of story, we also got some potentially really exciting insights into where things might be going. One of the first things Wes had to say was that the future films may actually explore other locations, and Wes really wants to see what New York and the Statue of Liberty of this universe looks like. And something that was also really interesting is that to him, this version of the Statue of Liberty looks pretty different than what we got in the original 1968 film.
We shot in Australia ultimately, which looks a lot like, I think, overgrown Los Angeles. It shares a lot of features, a lot of the gum trees and some of the rock features and stuff like that. Um, but like I said, I think in our minds that you will expand to other parts of the country, if not world. So yeah, stay tuned.
This is something that I have been wanting to see since Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I want to see what other parts of the world look like. I'm really excited about the possibility of seeing the Statue of Liberty and how it's different from the original. I'm really excited about the idea of seeing apes in other parts of the world and what's happened to Earth outside of the west coast of the US. And I'm really glad that Wes actually has at least somewhat of an idea for what the Statue of Liberty might look like and that it's different than in the original. What would the Statue of Liberty look like in this version of Planet of the Apes universe? The same as the 68 film?
Mhm. I almost don't want to give it away, but I would say no. And it would be fun to see how it ends up like the 68 version.
I think all of these are things that I'm excited and hopeful that are going to actually get explored in the next few movies. It's stuff that fans have been curious and asking about for a while now, and I think that it's finally time to get to it. Wes also revealed that the future films could potentially start building closer and closer to the original, and we could see the beginnings of the rules and the world that's established in the 1968 film.
Obviously, all the people involved with the creation of this movie, we've had many, many conversations, of course, of like where this can ultimately go. But I think you'd want to see that. You'd want to see the world expand a little bit and start, think of it as you know, think of it as something that kind of connects to those original movies. Now, not that we can't do our own thing. There's a kind of a loose canon to all these movies anyway. They're all sort of loosely connected. It's not super rigid like a lot of other franchises. But I think the fun part would be sort of building back to that original OG thing. Even if it takes 6 movies, you know what I mean. There's plenty of runway there. But start to think about those things and how Apes came to the point of deciding to create this incredible or covering up all the truth about humanity. What caused that? Where did that come from? You know what I mean? It's like to build all these kind of we started touching on like, a lot of these ideas that you see in those movies, a lot of the themes, but there's still a long way to go, I think, before we kind of those ends meet. You know what I mean? So that's a lot of fun for anyone that kind of loves these Apes movies, I think.
I think this is something that makes a lot of sense with where we are at in the timeline. We're 300 years removed from Rise and Dawn and War. I'm not 100% sure just how much of that will be a part of the story versus just an element of the world building, but I'm still really excited to find out and see how it's all done. I'm assuming that if they get to a third trilogy, that's something that could very much be setting the foundation of whatever that might be, but we're still a ways away from anything like that. So for now, it's all just stuff that's fun to speculate about. Another thing that Wes talked about, and this is something I think a lot of fans were kind of hoping he might address at some point, is the fan concern that the sequel to Kingdom is just going to be a rehash of what we got with Dawn and War in the Ape vs. Human story.
I don't think it'll be a soft reboot, Dawn and War, but these movies are always centered around sort of the interactions between apes and humans, right? That's just kind of the reality of things. That's where the good drama and the real story is. That's what makes this franchise, I think, tick and have lasted for as long as it has for these decades. So there's still plenty of original stories for us to tell, and I think a lot of surprises that we're very aware of that. I think that criticism, I suppose. But do not worry. I think we have ideas of where ultimately that's all can kind of lead itself.
These movies have always been and will always be about the power struggle between apes and humans, and he's not wrong. That is what the franchise, for the most part, has always been about in some way or another. But the key to him is to surprise people, to take a risk, take a big swing, and that we should expect something new.
I will say that, it's not worth doing unless we take a big swing.
I personally am just really happy to hear Wes address this directly and that they are all aware of the fan concerns. That's always something that makes me as a fan alleviated at least a little bit, knowing that the people making this stuff hear what the fans are concerned about and are curious about, and at least keep it in mind. I don't think it's always the smart idea to listen to the fans, but it's at least important to hear what they have to say. And after hearing this, I'm actually even more confident that whatever this new ape-human conflict is going to be a lot different than what we've seen before. I also really hope that once we start getting more official information about the next movie and the plot, fan concerns will quiet down when it comes to this specific topic. Speaking of that ape versus human conflict, something Wes Ball also wants to see in future films is an ape-human peace and what that might look like in this universe.
I always had an impression that humans and apes would coexist in Kingdom. Will we ever see a colony where humans and apes living together in peace?
Yes, I'd like to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, not exactly my choice at this moment, but I think that's a good idea, and to maybe see how that falls apart or not would be fun to play too.
Yeah, it's something we haven't really seen yet. We see it briefly
Yeah, it
for
does
5
not
minutes in
have to
Dawn.
just be
Yeah.
it does not just have to be apes and humans against each other, for
Yeah.
sure.
It's actually something that I made a video about not long ago, and something I also would like to see. I'm not sure if it means that's where this trilogy is actually going to go, but it's interesting and I think actually pretty telling that the director of the first film in this new trilogy wants to see it happen. And to me, it tells me that that's actually something that was very much in the back of his mind when making Kingdom, and something that very possibly could happen, at least for a short period of time, in one of these next few films. Another thing that Wes talked about in regards to Kingdom and where things might go in the future is the character of May and her backstory and how much we might learn about her going forward in the next film.
Do you know, like, what happened to her, where she really came from, like how she was raised and, brought into this world?
Oh yeah, we've talked a lot about it, but I think that again, I don't want to give away anything that might be explored in future movies. You know what I mean? Um, but yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot there, and hopefully there's enough here to kind of pique people's interest, to learn more.
Now, I personally am not sure how much of this additional backstory and history of the character that we will get to see explored, or even how much more is really necessary when it comes to the character of May. I will say that I'm curious to see if any of May's people or family are still out there, and if maybe that's a hidden part of her story that we haven't gotten to see yet. That being said, I personally like the ambiguity of May, so to me, learning just a little bit too much about her might not be that exciting for me personally, but it could also really elevate her character depending on what the story is and how it's executed. So when it comes to what's to come for the character of May and what things we might learn about her that we haven't already, I'm glad to know that the filmmakers do have ideas of what that is, and depending on what it is, I'm very curious to see it. And then briefly, something Wes addressed was something that has been going on ever since this movie's very first trailer came out, and it is the subject of Noah being a descendant of Caesar, and whether or not that is still a possibility. And here's what Wes had to say.
I love seeing everyone talking about, the Caesar Noah connection or not. So I'm not going to answer at all. But I know people noticed a little scar on his chest. Obviously, I was surprised at how much of a stir that caused, but it was definitely intentional. But you also see how he got it. He wasn't born with it. So, but maybe that's his destiny, or fate or something. But who knows? We'll see what happens in the future with that kind of stuff. I don't know that it needs to be a bloodline. Could be cool, but I don't think it needs to be either. So
Overall, I pretty much 100% agree. I think that Noah doesn't need to be related to Caesar. It's something I've reiterated on this channel numerous times. I think he works as a standalone, isolated character that isn't related to anybody. That being said, I am still pretty convinced that he will be revealed to be Caesar's descendant. I think that's just kind of the nature of these types of movies, these types of franchises, and I just would not be surprised if that is a big reveal that happens in the next film, whether it's towards the end or even in the third movie. Who knows? But I do think that it's coming. What that means for Noah, I don't know, but I just feel like it's something that's coming. I also think it's just interesting to hear that this is something that hasn't been decided yet. So to me, if this does happen, it's really just fascinating that this is going to be a evolution of the story that came after the character of Noah was created rather than something that was the original idea. So depending on how it's executed, I also just don't want it to feel forced. And speaking of heavily discussed topics in the Planet of the Apes fan base, Wes also addressed whether or not we might see Gibbons in the franchise at some point, and I actually asked him whether or not he thinks they can talk like other great apes, and he had what I thought was a pretty interesting answer.
Gibbons aren't. Yeah, they're not actually apes. I don't think they can talk. Yeah. Who knows? Maybe the virus had some effect on them where they can be a little bit more intelligent. I suppose that's possible, but I don't think they should talk. I think that's uniquely a great ape kind of phenomenon for me.
Personally, I'm just glad that such a highly talked about subject was finally addressed by a filmmaker involved in this franchise. It feels like something that's been pretty much completely ignored by everyone outside of the diehard fan base. So I thought it was really cool that someone actually involved heavily in the franchise finally talked about it a little bit in depth. I also thought it was pretty interesting that Wes doesn't think that Gibbons can talk, which is an answer that probably won't make everybody happy, but ultimately I do think makes some sense. I did talk about this a little bit, I think in a live stream not too long ago. Just scientifically, biologically, it just wouldn't translate, but who knows, maybe they can find a way to make it work. But either way, I do really hope we get to actually see them addressed in a bigger way outside of just a casual mention from Raka.
Then, of course, there is the Gibbon. Very, very long arms.
Even if they don't talk, they still are part of the simian family, and so I think it would be really cool to see that part of this universe expanded upon at least a little bit. And finally, and this is probably the most vague thing that we learned about the next film, but Wes revealed that in his mind, Kingdom and the story of Noah is just the beginning of a much larger story.
We discussed a lot about where this story could ultimately go, and that how this movie needed to really kind of exist on its own, kind of stand on its own 2 feet, but we see it very much as the beginnings of a large story, essentially, with Noah in particular. So yeah, we'll see. Again, I don't want to give away too much, and plus,
Yeah.
like I said, this isn't my franchise anymore, so someone might come in and change it all completely. Who knows? You know what I mean?
Honestly, this is something that we could have assumed based on the previous trilogy, just looking at Rise, going into Dawn and War, but to me, this is still pretty exciting just to hear confirmed. And something it also makes me really excited about is I'm even more eager just to see how important of a figure Noah becomes to ape history compared to Caesar. How big is his story going to be, and how impactful is it going to be in the overall world and narrative of this timeline of Planet of the Apes? Obviously, there's not much to go on there, but it is just an exciting little tidbit that I wanted to touch on. So I want to know what you guys think. For those who tuned into the live watch along of Kingdom, again, thank you. I hope you got a lot out of it and got your questions answered if you had any. But now I want to hear your thoughts on everything he had to say about the next movie. Did anything get you more excited, more nervous? I want you to leave all of your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you so much for checking out today's video here on Ape Nation. If you liked this video, be sure to hit the like button. You can also now join the Ape Nation Discord server for daily discussions about the franchise. And if you're interested in seeing more of my videos, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so that you can stay up to date on all things apes. I'll catch you in the next one, so until then, goodbye.